Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. We are starting our webinar. This is the third webinar of the series, four-part series of webinars dedicated to Technical Committee 68 of ISO. Today I would like to introduce you Pierre Epaillard, and Pierre Epaillard, he is the chair of subcommittee, and he will explain us how this subcommittee works, so how ISO 22 evolves, and also we will hear today other members. So Pierre has a lot of experience in financial telecommunications and standards, and I hope that he will share with us his view, the ISO 22, how it stands for today, and how it will move forward.
Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. So I'm the new chair of SC9, which is the TC68 subcommittee dedicated for information exchange for financial services. And I work with Audrey Himmer from AFNOR, who is our committee manager. Regarding myself, I have been working at Société Générale Bank for around 15 years in the area of payment and international projects. Association Français des Normes, I am involved in the development of standards and norms within the French banking community. So now I would like to present you the structure of SC9. I don't know if the first slide, very active and is leading major standards used in the financial services. The standard ISO 20022 is already used by payment system in over 70 countries all over the world. And it might become in the next few years the universal standard for high and large value payment system for all reserve currencies by 2025. We have a strong project on that topic. Financial messaging, format syntax, protocol. RMG, the registration management group, takes in account how the standard ISO 20022 is used. And Mike Tagai, who is the RMG chair, will explain this activity just after me. We have then, of course, an oversight group, AG1, dedicated to ISO 20022. This group is collecting inputs mainly from the RMG and all issues concerning the registration activities for the ISO 20022 standard. Regarding ISO 20022 standard, we will see that a lot of actions regarding its revision in progress within the activity of the WG4 group, which is here. Another very important standard, CAS standard, is also a major activity of SC9, which is based on the ISO 20022 standard. Still regarding CAS standard, we have a group WG3 dedicated to the revision of ISO 8583, which is largely used for financial transaction card originated interpreted to market category codes. Once these two standards will be published, they will be maintained with a maintenance agency. So that's here on the scheme, and the WG3 should be disbanded. So in this context, it is very important to access ISO 20 WG1 group. So last but not least, we have a new working group regarding the revision of ISO 5116, dedicated to the harmonization of supervisory reporting, and this group has just been created. So this first slide is an overview of the SC9 structure, how it works with these groups, working group, advisory group, technical group. And I mean, just after me, each convenors and chair of these groups will describe their activities. So on the next slide, we have some figures showing that we have 37 published standards largely used in the financial services, and 9 standards under development. So this will be detailed later on by the 25 participant members and also 8 observer members. We can see that these members are represent many countries all over the world, and all these members contribute to the delivery of high-quality standards by their active participation to the working group or technical group or advisory group, RMG. And I let Mr. Mike Tagai to present his activity.
I'm the convener, or let's say the chairman of the ISO 20022 Registration Management Group, as I was introduced earlier. I'm based in Tokyo, Japan, so probably good afternoon or good evening for most of you. Swift messages. And earlier, Pierre talked about ISO 20022 being used at payment systems and globally, and that it is becoming widely adopted. Some of the Swift messages, right. Some of the Swift messages, if you are in a payments organization or a payment bank, you might have been familiar with a message called PAX 008, PAX 009, or maybe a CAM-T 053, 054, which are all references of individual messages. And ISO 20022 is a method to develop such messages and publish it on the ISO 20022 repository. So everybody knows what is an ISO 20022 compliant model, and that everybody knows what is an ISO 20022 compliant message. Today, there are over 740 ISO 20022 messages, including the PAX 008 and PAX 009, available on the ISO 20022 repository. The repository can be accessed from iso2022.org website. But just to highlight that if you're familiar with payments and CAM-T messages or PAX messages, those are a handful of messages out of over 120 payment-related messages already on the repository. But as I said earlier, there are over 740 messages, and those messages include over 300 securities messages. We will hear about card messages later through the presentation by Mr. Douglas France. On the repository, there are messages related to foreign exchange, there are messages related to trade finance, and the other work groups at TC68 or under SC9 are actually working on better ways to represent data transport, and you will hear about those things. This, coming back to this page, as introduced earlier, the RMG is connected to the TC68 community with dotted lines. And it means that, as mentioned earlier, it is not exactly an ISO body, but it is closely associated because all the ISO bodies, working groups and subcommittees that you would be hearing about today are formal standards bodies. The ISO 20022 RMG is not a standard body. Let's say it is an execution body. It's an implementation body. It's a group of users, any user of ISO 20022 that can discuss how the ISO 20022 method could be used, could be implemented, and try to solve for real business transactions. So by providing user input, the ISO 20022 RMG aims to make the standard itself, ISO 20022, effective and fresh, reflecting the market needs and the user needs. So that is the reason why there's a dotted line. And as we are part of the ISO 20022, or let's say the TC68 and SC9 family, I'm very honored to be able to speak today. So thank you very much. And just to explain the role of SWIFT, which is at the right-hand bottom of this page, SWIFT has a contract with ISO, which is the vertical line, and they provide a function called the registration authority. And as in the footnote down on the bottom, it is in contract with ISO and carries out the actual registration activities, which we will go through in later slides. But in effect, a dedicated function within SWIFT provides a professional service to register models and messages to the ISO 20022 repository. And so let's go a little bit into detail of the RMG. Can we go to the next page, please? Thank you. And so as I mentioned earlier, the Registration Management Group, or RMG, represents any user or prospective user of ISO 20022. And it is the highest registration body, as it has the power to approve or disapprove new development requests, and it also acts as a court of appeal in case there are issues during the registration process. ISO TC68 SC9 itself is the owner of the ISO 20022 standard. So as a group of users, the RMG is responsible to provide the right feedback and input to the TC68 and SC9 groups. And recently, we have confirmed that the RMG is recognized as a partner to ISO TC68 and its subcommittees, so that we can work effectively and to put the standard into work. As mentioned earlier, SWIFT is also a key partner in this process, where it acts as the registration authority, which really provides the operational aspects of looking into the models and providing the right content, validated content, to the repository and making it available to the public and ensuring that those are ISO 20022 compliant. And as mentioned in the middle of the page, the reason we're talking about ISO 20022, and it will be illustrated later, is because it is a method that brings together many specific standards. And by doing so, it requires various actors in the financial transaction to be included and to ensure high quality exchange of data and information for financial services. The most, for those familiar with ISO 20022, you would have some association to understand that, oh, ISO 20022 is expressed in XML as a language. And it has been like that for close to 20 years now, because the first ISO 20022 message was developed back in 2004. It's close to 20 years now. But given that there is more attention to API data exchange as opposed to financial messages, and that there is more attention to JSON as a language, most recently, we have approved the creation of an API standards evaluation group to commence API resource registration, which means business components of an API now have a way to be deemed ISO 20022 compliant and to be registered in the repository at iso2022.org. So as you can see, the RMG is really an implementation body and facilitates new ways of implementation so that the ISO 20022 remains relevant as the market evolves. So that's an illustration of what the RMG is. And maybe in the next page, I would like to sort of illustrate how an ISO 20022 message could be conceived. This is only for illustration purposes. But as you can see, and if you're familiar with a Swift message, for example, well, first of all, a financial message has a structure, and then you can see it as that there are rules in the ways that you put things into order. And in some cases, you can put defined standards in place. Some could be ISO standards. Some may not be ISO standards where they do not exist. But the aim is to ensure that we have high quality data defined and then put in the right structure so it can solve for the real life problems that the financial community has. And so, although ISO 20022 itself is a standard, it tries to pull together the standards that are developed, for example, if it's reference data, the standards developed in SC8, we try to put them in here as much as possible. And the other developments going on in standards bodies, working groups within SC9 is allowing for new ways to put things into structure and then represent it to the users of those messages, for example, or models. So this was just an illustration, and I'll just go to the next page to go into further detail about the execution and implementation. If you are familiar with a Swift message, you would know that, for example, Swift has an annual maintenance cycle. So how different is this process where it says business justification registration process, and in bracket it says new submission. So this is when there's a request from a particular community to develop a new ISO 20022 message, they go through a business justification process. These are all published in iso2022.org, but the key is that these also go through steps, such as a Swift annual maintenance process. It starts with a financial industry group, which does not have to be an ISO 20022 RMG member or, well, any other group at all. The current RMG has 40 member bodies. Half of them are nations represented by ISO national member bodies. Others are also liaison organizations to ISO. And there are also other groups that bring in interest to ISO 20022, but the development of a message can come out from outside. And that process is called business justification. And the various groups, such as the RMG, the Standards Evaluation Group, SEG, and you can see the RA looking into the process at various points. And then finally, everything goes into the repository together with the data dictionary and the various models that are involved. This is the way a new message is developed. And so I'm also trying to mention here that ISO 20022 message is not something that's given from somebody. The community can participate and develop something new. And if we can go to the next page, which is my last page, this is similar to the Swift message maintenance process. But the difference is that the ISO 20022 has a process which will define what we call the base message. So if you go to ISO20022.org, you would find a place called repository items, and then you will see all the messages available, and you can probably see all 740 of them. Those are what we call base messages. And if you're familiar with Swift, what Swift does is they take one of the base messages, for example, pax008, then modify it slightly so that it can fit into the Swift network. And those messages, for example, most recently have been introduced as what's called a CBPR plus message. And that's just for payments. And all such adaptations take place at any network that is using ISO 20022. So those networks would have to be mindful about the annual process, the annual change cycle that the ISO 20022 message takes, and make sure that it syncs with their maintenance cycle, so that you don't have huge gaps in changes that take place. Currently, the ISO 20022 maintenance cycle is 1 year, but we're learning to make it faster. And for example, external code sets that are maintained outside of the main ISO 20022 messages are now subject to quarterly changes, for example. And we're trying to become more flexible to address the needs of the communities. But I'm sort of just trying to explain that these are all the, say, execution or implementation nuances that this ISO 20022 group is looking at as the RMG, so that the standard is more effective. So that was the explanation of the RMG. And I'm happy to hand over to the next speaker or back to Yuri. But just to remind that the next part is about how ISO 20022 is being explored to be improved and revised. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Mike. Pierre, maybe you can say a few words about this next presentation about the about cards, as far as I understand, because Douglas France, he's a convener of the cards subcommittee, so-called card standards. And maybe you can say a few words about Douglas and the work of this committee to introduce him, and then we'll pass over to.
Yeah, but before TG1, I think we can speak about WG4. No, it was not because WG4 is dedicated to the revision of the work in progress on ISO 20022. TG1. Okay, so Douglas, Franz Douglas is the convener of TG1 and also WG3. These groups are focused on the card standards, and we are very happy to I'm very happy to introduce Franz. I think Franz can take over the presentation.
Very good, thank you. So my background has been in card payments for many, many years, a few decades, and I have been currently the convener for about 5 years, just over 5 years. I've been the convener of the TG1 group, which is the technical group working on the ISO 20022 card payment domain of the ISO 20022 standard. So go ahead and forward to the next couple, about slide 2. I think the entry one is probably fine. Yeah, let's start there. So this is an example of kind of how the organization of TG1 works. There is currently a global ISO standard for card payments. It's known as ISO 8583, which you heard a moment ago mentioned by Pierre in one of the subcommittees, working group 3, where we were doing some work on that standard and where that will be maintained by a maintenance agency. With ISO 20022, we have what we call ATICA, which stands for Acquirer to Issuer Card Payments. And ultimately, the design of this is a much more flexible, much more nimble type of a standard versus what ISO 8583 is. It was developed in 1987 for the first publication. So somewhere in the 80s, it originated, or maybe even actually in the 70s, the structure of it, which was very much around the time that we were all living in mainframes and mini mainframes, and there weren't server devices. There wasn't a nice little phone that has more power than the computers did back then. So it was developed in a very structured, very organized manner, and has served us all extremely well for many, many years. However, with ISO 20022 and bringing financial services into a standard and having different domains, what my group does is we work on the card payment aspect of the overall 20022 standard. So within that, the way these circles are kind of designed, it is a X, whatever that may be. And we would then figure out, is that something we've already done somewhere and they're just not aware? Is that something that needs to be added? If so, how? That type of a thing. So we will do that ongoing maintenance, hence the reason for this circular kind of a design diagram on the page there. We interact with the RA, the registration authority, who you heard mentioned a moment ago by both Mike and Pierre. We interact with the RMG, with Mike's organization as a convener. We work with them to keep them informed, as well as to just make sure that there's transparency around what is going on. And then there is also the card SEG, which is a standards evaluation group for cards specifically. So we interact with them for what kinds of changes we're making, what kinds of updates we're doing. And then the last bubble here is really about maintaining the standard. More needs to happen. So there will come up what has happened with 8583 through all the years. It got to a, pretty much a solid base, and then there are different things that come along. Over the course of time, of course, there has been, so much change, and there still is. As Mike mentioned a moment ago, moving from an XML environment into an API and a JSON environment. So one of the things that we have to do is think about, how do we fit into that? Yuri, if you'll go to the next slide. On this slide, it really is talking about some of the work we're doing right now and our objectives for this year and into next year as we have defined it. So we have a couple of usable versions today. We are looking at that. We've taken a lot of feedback. We have interacted with a lot of implementers around the world who have all indicated that there are some fundamental basic things that we could do that would make the standard work that much better. From an efficiency perspective, from a processing perspective, and all of the various things that go along with how you process a card payment. We have today in our version 3, there's a structure that's actually very deep with layers of data elements. So there's a high level component, and then there's a number of things below that. And what we've heard is that's very difficult to process. That doesn't work very well in an API environment. It doesn't work for a JSON environment. So what we are doing currently is to flatten the structure so that we get the bulk of the components, and especially the major components of a card payment transaction, up more to a root level and keeping it much more flat so that it's a string of information versus a structure of information, if you will. So that's the first bullet there. The first section is on the message flattening and refactoring. And then we are expecting potentially this week or as early as next week to submit the work that we have done and what we expect to perform into the repository. We're expecting to deliver that to the registration authority by next week. And then from there, it will go to the CardSeg. Both the RA and the CardSeg will review for their applicable jurisdiction around that work, come back to us with approved, not approved, questions, etc. So we'll have a dialogue around that to get to a place where we then will go in and start doing the actual modeling work for the repository and submit that, which ultimately we anticipate early next year with the publication of a more streamlined and flattened version. So it takes time from submitting the request to doing the modeling work to the RA incorporating all of that into the repository to then actually publishing an official version. And then while some of that is going on, we will have an overlap, which is the last bullet here, which is to begin the next maintenance cycle. So we have quite a bit of information in a tracker that indicates these are things that at one time or another, somebody put forth and said we need. So what we will do is go through and look at all of those and say, have any of those been done to this point? If they have, great, we can mark them off. If they have not, do they need to be, how do they need to be done, etc. And then we will start working on what will become a version 5, which we would expect for a 2025 official publication. So gives you an idea from the time that we submit change requests into the RA today. Officially, June 1 is a date for the submission through a standard process. And then there is a period of time for the RA, the CardSeg, to do their reviews and approvals, to us doing the modeling work, to the RA doing their piece. So it's not quite a year long, but it's close to a year long in its perfect standard process from June 1 until spring of the following year for publication, just to give an idea of timeframes. So that will all be happening. The first 2 bullets here will be happening this year, and then the next maintenance cycle, we will start going through all of those items this year with an anticipation of submitting in the June 1 of next year for a spring 2025 publication, just to give an idea. And then the last slide, Yuri, if you'll flip to that one, this is just a list of who is actively participating today. There are more people that are officially registered into the TG1 committee, but these are the folks that are active and doing the work and making this all possible. And we do welcome new members. We do welcome new people to be a part of this. For those that have a card background, we are particular in that we are not educating on the full card background space in this group. This is really a working group to build and create the message. So the background in the card space, the background with the processing, etc., is one of the things that is extremely important. This group of people are all very well versed in card payments and in processing and how these transactions occur back and forth, all the way from the merchant all the way out to the cardholder and the issuer. And so I would like to publicly thank all of these people, because it's a great group of people working on this, and it's a lot of work when all these people have a day job as well. So this is it's a very large undertaking. So with that, I will turn it back over to Yuri, and thank you.
Douglas, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. It's really interesting to know what is the interplay between cards, payments, and the whole ISO 20022 area. Yes, and you are doing a great job, and thank you very much for that.
So Liza is going to present work on semantic models, but she will also speak about what we do in WG4. Unfortunately, Weiwei with the convener of WG4 cannot connect today, so we will present the activity of WG4 maybe just before the semantics.
So unfortunately, as Pierre mentioned, Weiwei was having technical difficulties connecting. So I am one of the members of WG4, actively engaged with WG4, so I will do my best to cover these slides on behalf of Weiwei. So by way of background, my name's Lisa Tai Kiseta-Porn. I actually am an active participant in many of the ISO TC68 committees and working groups representing either FIX protocol, which is another financial standard, or the US country. So, and I have, over 30 years of experience in the financial services sector, primarily as a messaging standards consultant for about 20 plus years, and have worked with many types of clients, including buy side, sell sides, and vendors in the electronic trading space. So on that note, regarding WG4, this was a working group that was formed in as a result of the resolution taken in December, or prior to December in 2021 by SC9 to put ISO 20022 standard into revision. So this is the standard that Mike Tagai had mentioned, where it's the core standard for financial messaging for under TC68. And the ISO 20022 standard itself is consisting of 8 parts, and it forms the framework in which the ISO 20022 XML messages that many of you may be familiar with today is created from. So Yuri, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So these are the 8 parts of the standard today. And the parts that are in revision are part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. And part of the work that WG4 has been doing in reviewing these 8 parts, and also as a result of the study group, whether to put the 20022 into revision or not, the feedback from the study group, we are analyzing these parts in very detailed process. And part of that process is we've also concluded that we are looking to propose a new part to the standard that will provide a way and a framework for future syntax support for the ISO 20022 business model itself. So Yuri, if you can go to the next slide, please. So currently the working group is split into 3 subgroups to carry out the work. It is very detailed work. We have a lot of discussions almost on a weekly basis. Some of the groups are meeting weekly, some of the subgroup are meeting every other week. So the 3 subgroup consists of the syntax and semantics. So this is a subgroup that talks about primarily the semantics, how that could be brought in, as well as the syntax generation, particularly part 4 and part 8. And it also looks at what should be included in the proposed Part 9. Subgroup 2, which is the meta model subgroup, is looking currently primarily at what changes need to be made in Part 1, which is the meta model, to support the new things that we are talking about in subgroup 1, as well as how do we try to future-proof the meta model as well for other new methods in which we can think about the model, particularly when it comes to semantics. The subgroup 3 is primarily focused on the governance, which is the registration process, which is part 7 of the standard today. So Yuri, if you can go to the next slide. So very briefly, this is where we are in our process. As we move through the different phases, we are currently on phase 2 of the planned work. The dates that's on the slide could change because we are realizing that there is definitely a lot of work that needs to be considered and what changes should be applied to the different parts of the ISO 20022 standard itself. So WG1, which I'm the convener of, was a working group that was formed quite a few years ago, and we were tasked with taking a look at how semantic technology can be applied to the ISO 20022 business model. We were a working group that is not tasked to produce new standards, but tasked to produce what ISO calls technical reports. So we looked at and investigated different semantic technologies such as RDF-OWL, ontologies, Sparkle, knowledge graph, etc. That's just some of the things we looked at. And part of the effort also is to look at how can we apply these technologies along with the ISO 20022 business model to bridge between the 20022 business model and different standards, financial standards that are out there in the industry, such as FIX, FPML, ACTUS, even the legacy 15022, for example. We have produced a series of technical reports, 2 of which are on the ISO website. But just to let the audience understand what is a technical report. Basically, these are reports that are informative and are statement of facts. What did we learn out of the process of this investigative process that we went through? And the reports are not allowed to propose new standards or suggest changes to existing standards. So at the moment, there are 5 reports that we have either worked on or are working on. So the part 1 of the series of reports, the reports are going to be called ISO TR, I think it's called ISO TR 22126, and then there's the part number after that. So the part 1 is just going to be a general introduction, and that is currently in draft. Part 2, which is a part that was recently completed where we investigated our representation of the 20022 meta model and the business model. It is currently actually with SC9 to be put into ballot hopefully soon. What we did in this report is to take a look at how do we use RDF and OWL to transform between ISO 20022 Auth 16 message, which is a regulatory reporting message, and one of FIX protocols message that is also typically used for trade reporting, which is the trade capture report. And the technical report documents the demonstration of the feasibility of using such technology to do transformation at a semantic level for between these two financial messages that exist today. Next slide, please. Technical report 3, part 3, actually is currently on the ISO website already, and it was investigating possible enrichment to 2002 conceptual model to support semantics at the model layer. So, for those of you who are interested, certainly you can take a look at the report that is available on the ISO website, iso.org website. Part 4 is still in the works. It is currently being drafted as well. And this part will take a closer look at the possibility of take a look at what other things can be done at the model layer. One of the things that we try to do with this part to investigate is, can we stand up the technology to support such transformation? But unfortunately, we ran into a lot of stumbling blocks in standing up that technology stack. So part of this report also is to take a look at what are the possibilities of different technology stack, and also document what was successfully accomplished, which was between the transformation between FIX and the meta model, as well as 20022. And we'll also talk about ISO 11179 and how that could help with such type of semantic layer transformations. Next slide, please. And lastly, part 5, which is also already on the ISO282.org. This was specifically a technical report that looked specifically at the transformation between FIX Orchestra, which is a FIX standard, and ISO 282 meta model. So it's a report that showed how we can map between the two standards at a meta model perspective. So it's a pretty short report, but it demonstrates that it can be done. And I think the last comment I do want to make is technical report 2 and technical report 3 in particular, out of the work that we did in WG1, was shared with WG4 so that they can take it as input into, as feedback into what would make sense to enhance the 2022 meta model with, based on what we learned, to better support semantic serialization out of the business model. So that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Liza, for the very interesting presentation. And we learned that producing semantic models is not very easy. Yeah, it's not very straightforward task, and of course there are a lot of hurdles, but still, working all together, we can and we'll move forward. So with this in mind, maybe we will just wrap up. If Pierre wants to add something to all this presentation, and just to wrap up.
I would like to thank everyone for the time and for the very high level presentations. showing that all the groups of RC9 are very active and very important work is done on all their standards, not only ISO 20022, but also all what we have presented today. I don't know, maybe we can go to the questions about this.
Yes, of course, yeah. So we can. So there are a few questions, and one, for example, is what kind of help can you expect from the local technical committees? So because we have in Ukraine, for example, we have TK 199, which is a mirror committee of TC 68. What do you think? How do you see this this work together between country committees and ISO subcommittees?
I think the best way to cooperate with local committees is to have some experts, maybe from your country, that could join our groups. So I think it could be a way to take in account what is done, what are your specifics, and which kind of evolution you could add to our standards. I think it could be one way to participate and to integrate our work.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering this question. We have also another question. So, what are the subcommittee group responses to the developments in the field of cryptocurrencies and also CBDCs? Because there is a growing role of CBDC. Do you see that you will somehow incorporate into the semantic models, or just you incorporate these CBDCs into ISO 20022? And if yes, just generally speaking, what is the way? What do you think?
All the conveners, do not hesitate to also make answers. What I can say, we have a study today with a AG5 group, which is at TC68 level, working on CBDC, and we are on a step, a very advanced step, collecting the impacts that CBDC could have on the existing standards. But we are on a very primary phase. We are not because on CBDC perimeter we have a lot of legacy regulatory topics that are not today on the table. So as of today, we have made a work, listing what could be the impacts on CBDC on the existing standards, but it's a very primary work, So this question is under study. Maybe, I don't know, maybe so Mike, or you can complete. Maybe.
Okay, Mike?
So from an ISO 20022 perspective, as Pierre mentioned, as part of the overall TC68 AG5 study, all the subcommittees, and also including ISO 20022 RMG, reviewed their existing processes and existing standards, and whether they are ready for any CBDCs to be proposed. And the preliminary conclusion of that study was that, yes, we have appropriate processes in place to allow new developments to take place or changes to existing standards to facilitate the, let's say, arrival of such new products. So there is confirmation that we have processes in place that can facilitate for a new type of a standard to be developed or a new type of message to be developed. But from an ISO 20022 perspective, as you saw on my earlier presentation, the outcome could be different in terms of which community comes up with what kind of CBDC proposal, for example. For example, if a CBDC is designed and developed in a way that it can, let's say, a message is required over, for example, a SWIFT network, then in some markets, it could simply be just to add a currency code that represents a CBDC. Say, there are precedences. For example, if you go to Switzerland, they actually have three currency codes to facilitate for specific transactions. And there are ways to do that if it is conceived that the existing messaging structure can be used. So that's like a CBDC message developed in a very quick way. However, if the CBDC is designed as a transaction that takes place on a blockchain, for example, then first of all, a concept of a message could be different, given that transactions on a blockchain are simultaneous and cannot be reversed, and all those, let's say, good aspects. Some of the functions that are required today in some services may not be required. Sanction screening, KYC, due diligence, those processes need to be redefined when things are transacted over a blockchain as opposed to using a financial message. So we see an evolution that the characteristic of messaging could change by the use of APIs or by the use of blockchain, and everything will result in new ways of data transport. But we believe that we have processes in place to be able to understand the underlying difference in the business requirements and develop new ways of doing that data transport. But the trigger has to happen from the community that requires those messages or data exchange. The standards organizations, such as the subcommittees, as well as the RMG, would not want to speculate and put a standard forward to the market and say this is the way to do CBDCs, but we'd rather want to understand each individual community's business requirement first to be able to develop specific data transport methods for that community or for that use case and start from there. One last comment is that, for example, if you are looking for, let's say, stable coins, which are already transacted, sometimes bilaterally or sometimes through an exchange, those are already in live transaction mode. So if there is a need, there is always opportunity to develop messages. Next in the evolution could be digital assets, because it is getting closer to being regulated. And once it's regulated, probably it will interact with the, let's say, the legitimate side of financial services. And there would be need for standard communication methods and standard data exchange to be developed. CBDCs, we consider that some could be already live transacted, but for large-scale major usage, we still believe that there is more experimentation that needs to take place, and underlying legislation and regulation to be put in place so that everybody understands what the underlying scheme is in order to develop a financial message or data exchange method to be put in place. So overall, we will be welcoming any submissions from any community that is looking to transact with the new products where CBDC is not a exception. So thank you very much for the question.
Okay, sorry, and just to move forward, also we have some questions regarding this CBDC model. Yes, so do you think that that CBDC and, let's say, cryptocurrencies, they really fit into the ISO 20022 model, or there should be different standards, for this kind of transactions, not based on the messages, but maybe based on some other forms of communications. What do you think? Or maybe this is a question not for you. Maybe this is a question for Lisa. I don't know. Just what do you think?
So let me start. And so the ISO 20022 process can be defined in 3 steps. And it's really about following the 8-part standard that Lisa mentioned earlier. It starts from identifying the actors in the financial transaction. Who transacts with who, or who sends what kind of data to whom. And then step 2 is to model the data requirements. What kind of data travels for what purpose? How is the data defined? And what is the relation with one data to the other? And then step 1 and step 2 put together, it's like who needs to send whom, what kind of message, which is what kind of data needs to put together in what order, which results today in an XML message or an ASM.1 message, for example. And so that is the process. So as long as there is an actor and if there is data that needs to be defined and that data needs to be put in order to be automatically processed, there's a way to put an ISO 20022 model and an ISO 20022 message together. However, we are also aware that there are some blockchain standards, for example, that talk to settlement standards. And so there are standards that are already emerging in some parts of the cryptocurrency world, for example. And those standards are there for the purpose to facilitate, let's say, standard transactions amongst some communities. And well, probably we would call it that they are not ISO standards, but de facto they work as standards that work for that community. We're ready to work with such communities to bring everything under the ISO umbrella, but we're probably not as ahead as those markets. So we're sort of trying to follow and make sure that we don't get left behind. Lisa, would you have anything to add?
I think what I would like to add is in a lot of ways the 20022 business model is agnostic to the asset class. If for example, if you were to treat a digital asset as an asset class, it is agnostic to that because the framework exists to support across different asset class as it does today. And as Mike points out, the framework of 20022 standard itself is you define the business process you want to support, and then what are the data points and messaging interaction that you need to support that business process. And if the community feels that 20022 framework can be used to do what's needed in the CBDC or digital asset space, I think those are submissions that would be considered and looked at.
Okay. Thank you very much. So as far as I understand, just correct me if I am wrong. So we understand that basically ISO 20022 models, they can incorporate all these different styles of communications. So we really we wouldn't need additional, let's say, standards for another types of communications, because as far as I understand from what you are saying, you're really just trying to take use cases and user stories and just translate it with the ISO 20022 into the feasible model of interactions, isn't it?
Yes, and it's it's about the data that needs to be exchanged, which then becomes what are the messages that needs to be exchanged, right? So in a way, it is both a ISO 20022 business model is the conceptual model, and then we have the physical model, which is the actual message model itself, which is what the XML 2022 XML messages that some of you are familiar with comes out of that.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. And also there is another question. Maybe you can also answer these questions. So you mentioned in your presentation that you make like a technical reports and you try to maintain communications with other technical committees, or let's say it's like. Committees which are responsible for cards payments and others. So what type of communications do you have, and how you ensure that this work on ISO 20022 just works, fits nice together with what other technical committees are doing?
So the 2022 revision working group 4, clearly because it serves such a wide group of business users, payments, settlements, cards, electronic trading transactions, regulatory reporting. I mean, the cards group have representatives on the WG4 as well, and basically the participation is there from the different stakeholders within that use the standard. So, and those representatives, for example, from the cards group would liaise between WG4 and the cards group.
Okay, yeah, okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pierre. And you have something to add, just to wrap up, because this was actually the last question for today, and we will finish with this. Maybe you can say a few words, and we had just done our webinar in 1 hour 20 minutes, which is good, and so we used our time wisely. So thank you. So.
Yeah, I just would like to thank everyone for the high quality presentations. If you have further questions, we spoke about CBDC, but later on maybe we could speak also about artificial intelligence. I think it will be also a great topic that will be held by TC68, but it's not on the table today. But if you have any question, furthermore, do not hesitate to send the question by email, or we can answer later on if you have any more questions on your side. And thank you, Yuri, for your for this organization. I think it was very well organized, and thanks a lot for that. And we hope that we help to go through the events that Ukraine is facing today, and do not hesitate to contact us if you have any concern or any more questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pierre. Thank you very much, everybody. I would like to say thank you today for Mike Tagai, who participated in our conversations today. To unfortunately, Wai Shen couldn't join us, but Liza did also very good presentation about the respective working group. So we had Douglas France with us, and also thank you very much for Liza presentation on semantic models. So thank you very much, everybody. And also, what I'd like to say thank you for many attendees of this webinar from Ukraine. So we are doing this webinar for Ukrainian audience to understand how we can move forward together with international standardizations, because we know that that standards are very, very important. Yes, we really have very difficult times, and I want to say thank you very much to all people from our financial community who are still supporting our financial system, and our financial system does work. And we deeply believe that life will overcome, and criminals will be prosecuted, and we will live together in a peace. But we have to work on this. And thank you very much for all the efforts. We need to work together, and standards is the common language of financial development. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, for development. Be safe, and I wish you good luck, and we will see you next time. Please follow us on our YouTube channel and on our website. We will send you more and more useful information. Thank you very much. Be safe, and everything will be all right.